my name is Yulia and you're watching UMulticultural's Community Hour. In this segment, we are talking about civic issues in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I would like to introduce our guest, Dr. Kausar Ahmed. He is an Executive Director of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada. CRIC studies diverse dimensions of conflict affecting human security and livelihood. Hello, Dr. Kausar Ahmed. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Can you please introduce yourself and the projects you're running?
Thank you once again for inviting me. My name is Dr. Kausar Ahmed, and I came to Canada to pursue my PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies in 2010. I graduated in 2017 from Peace and Conflict and Justice Department from Arthur V. Maurer Institute from University of Manitoba. Then I did my postdoc fellowship at University of Winnipeg. It was funded by Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I do teach as an adjunct in Political Science Department of University of Winnipeg and also an adjunct in Natural Resource Institute in University of Manitoba. I co-founded Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada with Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin in December 2017.
Mm-hmm. And what was the impetus for starting Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada?
Very interesting question. Actually, if you follow some of the human displacement due to armed conflict, you'd possibly know that Rohingyas is an ethnocultural minority communities in Myanmar. So in 2017, to be precise, August 2017, the largest exodus after Second World War till we had Ukraine conflict. So that was the very large displacement of human took place, and they actually entered Bangladesh, where I was born and raised and spent 40 years of my life. So when I saw that displacement and I knew that it's going to be very complicated and a very long journey about this crisis which is unfolding in Bangladesh. So we decided that since we know the terrain, we have the knowledge and expertise, we wanted to contribute in conflict transformation and resolution. And that was my primary motivation when we first think of having a research think tank. And I would also like to add here by saying that in our country, it is not very common to have a research organization particularly focusing on advocacy and pure applied research. So from that point, I think ours is a very unique organization which we started back in 2017.
Yeah, you've told that it's not common for our country to have an organization like this. Why do you think it is important?
For two reasons, actually. First is policymakers need some input from civil society. For example, in the case of human displacement, and ours is a country, Canada is very proud to be involved in support of humanitarian aids and many other humanitarian assistances. So for that purpose, the government and policymakers might not have adequate knowledge about the conflict itself and the dimensions, and most importantly, how the money that has been allotted to be spent. So we fill that void. We come with the expertise of knowledge. We know the places, we know the people and their needs, so we can advocate properly. And secondly, I would say that conflicts in far areas like Myanmar, Bangladesh, South Asia are least discussed in North America, and especially because of the distance. So we keep this agenda up and running by having webinars, seminars, dialogues, writing blogs, etc. So I think for these two reasons, our organization is quite unique.
And what are your main groups are you working with? Who are your priorities?
So our priority of the projects, if you might ask in that way, so we are working very assiduously on Rohingya crisis resolution, supporting Rohingya refugees, and also since 2019 we are running a number of education projects for female adolescents in the camps, because that is the most vulnerable group and they need most of the support in any given point in time. So that could be our number one priority. We have published 2 books on that. We have ran over 50 webinars on this issue. Second priority, I would say that local conflict issues and global conflict issues. For example, we are running a federally funded project. It was funded by Department of Heritage in fighting disinformation war in Ukraine, through the Russian war. So we started back in July, and this project is ongoing. It will be ending in March. Then we also actively participate in extremism and radicalization prevention in Manitoba. I'm the project lead of a project which is running for 3 years now, funded by Public Safety Canada, and it is sponsored by University of Winnipeg. And finally, I would say we are also very much involved in transformative dialogue, meaning that we bring people together in a single platform to discuss about conflict issues and how to resolve it. So this is how we kind of connect the policymaker, the activists, the students, and other stakeholders in the society.
You have so many different programs and researches. Which one do you think is the most successful one, or the most important one for our community?
It's difficult to, let's say, put a grade on the programs, but if you might say in terms of beneficiaries, in terms of resources that you have employed, I think the successful one would be our extremism and radicalization prevention in Manitoba. In terms of its reach, is quite large project. As I say, 3 years long project, and we are the target of this project is to educate teachers in high school and middle school to understand the nature and dynamics of extremism, far right and far left, and Islamist and other types of extremism in our country, in our city. So I would say that would be the most hopefully once done, most successful one. But I would also like to add that our project in educating Rohingya female children is also very, very important, and we have run 2 pilot projects, and the second one is ongoing, funded by Rotary International, and we are educating nearly 500 female adolescents in the camps. So this is really important, and we always value the education of females in the camps.
Do you think that public are educated enough about this stuff, or we still have a lot to learn and to get more knowledge?
Well, interesting question in the sense that yes, we live in a world of public perception, no doubt in it. Especially media plays a very big role. In terms of Rohingya crisis, I would sadly note that it is not much covered in our country, other than at the top federal level. Our Right Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he is involved directly. He has appointed a personal envoy to look into this conflict. Other than this, I don't see much coverage in mainstream media about Rohingya crisis. And just so that you know, Canada is the only Western nation which has put forward nearly $600 million over the past 6 years, and also supporting a case in International Court of Justice with regards to Rohingya genocide. And in our parliament, we have also recognized Rohingya issue as a genocide. So Canada is very much involved. But in social media and in mainstream electronic and print media, I don't see much reflection on Rohingya crisis. Secondly, in terms of extremism and radicalization prevention, I would say that yes, it is covered quite a bit, but again, this topic is very, I would say, seasonal. If something happens, then people jump on this issue. They want to know this and that. For example, Freedom Convoy movement, when it happened, even in our city, people called me, for interviews, and I went and spoke in CBC, CTV, etc. But when it dies down, then people keeps quiet, and they just go. But I think it's very much routine and normal in our life because everything is issue specific and issue centric.
And what steps do you think we should take to change this situation and to make people more knowledgeable? And who is responsible for that? Who can make changes, like public or journalists or government or maybe organization like yours?
Well, I would say that in a society like ours, we are very privileged. That's what I really would like to start with. We are very privileged because we have all the resources here in Canada. We have electricity, we have running water, we have food in the stores, we have the affordability to buy stuffs, right? So this is a privilege which we have acquired just being Canadian. And if you look around, and through your channel, I would like to also say that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people around living in the globe, those who are not privileged as ours. They don't have food, they don't have running water, electricity, and etc. So I think we all have responsibility to help and support those marginalized, those have-nots, with whatever capacity we have. For example, from our organization, Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada, we have organized 130 webinars, 130 webinars over the past 2 years. The aim of these objectives of this webinar is nothing but reaching out to people with topics. So if you go to our website, if you visit our thematic areas, you will find 15 thematic areas that we touched, we covered, ranging from Rohingya crisis, extremism prevention, to climate action, and nuclear anti-nuclear youth movement, so and so forth. So through these things, we are trying to reach out. But again, as you understand that we live in a very fast-paced, information echo chamber, if you might say so, and where things get passed very quickly. So I would say that, through your today's interview, if people are listening to us, I would request them to tune in to our webinars. We regularly broadcast these webinars, and for example, today at 7 p.m. we have a very interesting high-profile webinar. One senator from our city, Mary Lou McFadden, and a member of parliament, James Bezan, they are speaking about the anniversary of the Ukraine war, because we are running a project on Ukraine war and disinformation.
If we compare the time 5 years ago when your organization just started and now, do you feel that public became more interesting and engaging in the topic like this? And how many people are interested in visiting and watching your webinars?
Well, that's, I think, a very important question. Let me give you some stats. When we started back in 17, we understand the power of social media. So we have had all these channels, YouTube, Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, etc. So in 2018, when I curated the numbers, I do recall we had something around 160 or 70 followers in YouTube, and LinkedIn around 30, 40. Twitter, we have very active Twitter post and account, so around 50, and so on and so forth. But as of today, let me share with you with a bit of pride that we have 925 followers in our YouTube channel. You can just go and see the stats. And in Twitter, we are being followed by 520 groups and peoples. Then in LinkedIn, we have similar number. So I think over the past 5 years, we have grown into the public space, the communication space, and people are talking to us. People do come and join our webinar. And these webinars are totally free, right? I mean, we don't even sometimes pay honorarium to the guests. These are all volunteer things. So people do feel that if they come to our webinar, participate in the transformative dialogue, they do contribute in resolving social and global political and economic issues.
And what tools do you think help you to engage more people and keep them interested?
Well, it's a tough question. The way we think and keep our audience engaged in two ways. First is we pick issues when we arrange a webinar very carefully. We do extensive background research when we decide to arrange a webinar. For example, today's webinar is focused on the 1 year anniversary of the war itself. So for last 6-7 days, we have planned, we have researched, we have prepared for this webinar. We have reached out to the guests and all. So I think this is one of the ways we work hard to make these interesting. And with regards to projects, I think we also subscribe to those projects which are very important socially, politically, economically. For example, rising extremism in our societies is a very current issue. We have seen the extreme right, white supremacy, and Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. These are all in the upward trend in our society. So we are working on that, and people are automatically engaged because they also think that these are our social problems.
You've told that you work with marginalized communities, with refugees, and you gave people a lot of knowledge about this. But knowledge is good, but we need more investment. Do you think is there enough investment to help these marginalized communities in Manitoba?
No, there is always a need. There is always a huge need, because when we say, or let's say identify marginalized communities, there are a number of ways you can do that. So we we view marginalization in many ways, and just to give you one piece of idea or concept is that we talk about structural violence. If the structure of the society, economically, politically, and socially, culturally, if it is structured in a way that it automatically oppresses different groups of people, minorities, then it is very difficult to change the structure itself. But just to be aware of the oppressive structure is important, and here comes the importance of the knowledge. And I would say that yes, more investment needed in terms of helping marginalized population in our city, in our province. For example, we have a huge problem of homelessness, as we all understand. And today, for example, it is utterly cold outside, and I'm sure we have not been able to meet all the housing needs of our people in our city. And we do have a lot of issues with regards to minorities not being able to access social services. We have taken refugees. We do take refugees each year from different conflict zones. When they come, they face a lot of barriers in terms of integrating into the society, and they remain marginalized for many months, or in some cases years. So yes, we need a lot of investment, a lot of knowledge. Well, you rightly said knowledge is one part, but without knowledge, how do you understand what you're going to do? So this is why these are interlinked. So we need action, money, fundings, but also we need knowledge to understand the nature of the things that we are going to do.
And what are the policies in our community to address issues faced by groups identified as marginalized?
Policy-wise, well, there are many organizations, for example, Social Policy Council, SPC, and others. We do study a lot of marginalized communities, their needs and their actual what they want. But I do think that the policy knowledge generated in terms of issues must be transmitted to the policymakers, because at the end of the day, you and I, we are not policymakers. We are living in a different spectrum, a different environment. But policymakers sitting in the big places, for example, I'm talking about all three tiers of government, municipal, city, and province, and of course overarching the federal government. So they do make policies, right? And they decide how much money to be spent in what sectors. So from our side, civil society side, we analyze, we research issues, and we provide knowledge to the policymakers. But policymakers at the end of the day have to really prioritize, because they know how much resources they have. And here comes the priority, right? Each government, each tiers of government and leadership, they do have their own priorities, right? Because they are elected each year. So they have to also juggle this whole stuffs. So I would say define synchronization. might not happen as you and I expect always. It's not an ideal situation, but we should try and strive towards an ideal situation where the recommendation meets the policymakers' priority.
You have mentioned that we have Canada and Manitoba have a big number of homelessness people. Why homelessness is still a big issue in our country?
I think as I was referring back to you, the structural issues that we have in our country, in our province, in our city, is one of the main causes that exacerbates homelessness. For example, we are G7 nation, one of the richest club of nations that we have in the world. So technically, we don't like to talk about poverty, but poverty is there. And the way it impacts the ability of people to have a roof on their head is difficult to ascertain and understand. So there is a lack of understanding the actual need of people, those who do not have home. For many reasons, people become homeless. It is not exactly tied to the rise of mortgage rates or etc. Rather, it is tied to the livelihood, the way people perceive their need in terms of living in a place where they call it home. It varies, and there is no the reason or root cause of homelessness. There are multiple reasons. These are economic, cultural, and some bit a colonial legacy of oppression of our indigenous population. And these are multiple factors that cause homelessness. And each city has their own cultural differences. For example, the homelessness in Vancouver, which I practically witnessed many a times passing through the areas, versus ours is different, because the factors which is operating in Vancouver and in Winnipeg are not same actually. Well, there are some common factors, of course, but there are also varying factors that we must understand and try to resolve, so that homelessness becomes less and lesser each year.
So is there any way to decrease the number of people who suffer from homelessness?
Of course, there are examples worldwide, especially some of the Scandinavian countries. If you go, you will not find homeless people on the street. These are also very cold countries like ours, right? Norway, Finland, and so as I said, in Scandinavian countries. So we might look into their models. What did they do? But on the top of my head, I would say that more investment in housing, let's say economy, housing and cheap housing, might be the first step to start, because you need resources first to get people inside, warm places and home. And secondly, I think we should also find out why people become homeless at the first step, right? I mean, there are some psychological barriers, psychological needs, psychosocial needs. So if we can find out some of the things which is pertinent in our city, I think that will go a long way in resolving this crisis.
And what do we have to offer to meet the specific needs of homeless people and all the type of marginalized communities?
So when, as I said, I'll go back to my initial comments, that when we say marginalized, we should be really aware of which group of people we are talking about. Are they from indigenous communities or ethnic minorities, those who came here as refugees and settled down? So first we need to identify those things and the needs itself. For example, in many cases, our indigenous communities' needs are different than that of refugee and settler community here, because they come from different contexts. They have some skills and different skill sets, right, than that of our indigenous members of the community. So we need to understand those needs and those abilities of different groups. And as I said, there is no homogeneous group of people that we can brand them, marginalized, and therefore they are subjected to homelessness. There is no homogeneity of this. There are diverse group of people, go back to this group of, or the category of homelessness. So I think we should be able to do more research and convince the policymakers. Let me end by saying that there is no dearth of research or let's say knowledge. What we lack is the application of that knowledge in real time. And we need political willingness. We need the willingness to understand that this is a problem. And sometimes I use the word crisis. I mean it because it is a crisis. If it is minus 37 at night, homeless person will die. And one person dying in a country like ours is too much. And this is what the priority our policymakers, whoever is sitting in what strata, doesn't matter. They should understand that this is a crisis. And let's label it as a crisis and then put our resources, our brains, and our hearts and minds together to resolve this problem.
Why is it important to work with marginalized communities?
Look, we are all together. If somebody is marginalized and we are not, that doesn't absolve us from our duties and responsibilities as a good citizen. This society is composed of various types of people. Look at the multicultural, the tapestry of, if I may use the word, the city, the place that we are talking about. If we even give example here, right? You come from a different background. I come from way different background, culturally and ethnic point of view. So we all are together. And if a marginalized community remains marginalized, there are two problems. Because in many cases, especially in the Western world, you will find there are big cities, even in London, UK, in Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, all big cities, metropolitan cities. There are suburbs, even in Paris, they call it banlieues. There are suburbs which are often called ghettos. So we don't want any ghettos here, because if people are growing up, especially the young people growing up in ghettos, they are subjected to radicalization, to violence, which you have seen in the case of Paris. I'm referring to Charlie Hebdo attack. And also, this whole marginalization creates a notion of injustice. And through injustice, if somebody is growing up within an unjust system, definitely take it guaranteed that they will become angry. So those who are not living with them, or those who think that we are safe living in a gated communities, none of us are safe, because this anger will come out in some form or fashion. Remember the riots in London a couple of years ago. Why these riots in a city like London? But it happened, right? So we need to understand the bigger ramifications of this hopelessness, and which can brew within the marginalized communities.
Just to wrap up, what are your hopes for Manitoba's future in regard to improving access to services marginalized communities?
Well, being an academic, being a civil society actor, I am optimistic. I have to be optimistic. There is no other option. So let's start from there. And of course, I do see changes, and I do see positive changes. And I'm very hopeful about the city. We have a new mayor, right? I mean, very recently elected. And we have all the good-hearted people in various government and other offices. And I just wanted to convey our civil society side. Our message to them is that if you spend time to understand, we are there to give you knowledge, to give you research findings, and if you as policymakers take it seriously, if you allocate more resources, this situation of homelessness and a lot of ways that people become marginalized, people perceive them as marginalized, can be rooted out. Winnipeg can be one of the model cities in North America where people live together, stay happy, and enjoy the multicultural society that we all aspire to be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for this great conversation. Our audience and I learned so much from you. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Dear audience, that is a unique privilege to talking to you. And please do follow Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada if you can, and we'll be very happy to see you amongst our audience. Have a nice rest of the day.
Sure, and thank you our audience for joining us today. We hope you enjoy it. If you like the episode, please like, share, and subscribe to see our upcoming episodes.